There is a bridge across the Mississippi River just north of St. Louis that does something no bridge is supposed to do. Halfway across, a mile of steel truss simply changes direction, bending 22 degrees mid-span for no reason a driver could ever guess. This bridge should not still exist. It was closed to traffic, marked for demolition, and scheduled to be torn down and sold for scrap. And yet it is still standing today, not because anyone fought to save it, not because a community rallied around its history, but because of a number on a piece of paper that made destroying it more expensive than simply leaving it alone. No preservation society intervened in time. No wealthy benefactor stepped in. The math simply refused to cooperate, and a piece of Route 66's most photographed crossing survived purely because nobody could turn a profit tearing it down. What saved it wasn't sentiment, and it wasn't luck either, just an accountant's arithmetic that happened to break the right way at exactly the wrong moment. Hold that thought. This is the story of the Chain of Rocks Bridge. 1. The bridge that was built to charge you. Every bridge tells you it was built to connect two places. This one was built to charge you for the privilege. Opened in 1929, the Chain of Rocks Bridge was a private toll crossing from the very beginning, financed not by government money, but by investors betting that a growing river of automobile traffic between St. Louis and the roads heading west would pay for itself, 1 nickel and 1 dime at a time, for decades to come. The bend in the middle wasn't an aesthetic choice or an engineering mistake. It existed because the riverbed itself demanded it. A stable footing on the Illinois side sat at an angle to the best footing on the Missouri side, and rather than pay for the enormously expensive foundation work a straight crossing would have required, engineers simply let the bridge turn where the ground told it to turn. It was, in other words, a cost-saving decision baked into the bridge's very shape before a single toll had ever been collected. There is something almost fitting about that origin. A bridge whose entire later story would be dictated by cost calculations began its life with exactly that same logic. Every choice engineers made in 1929, where to sink the piers, how sharply to bend the span, how much steel to use, was weighed first against what investors were willing to spend, not against what a perfectly straight, aesthetically ideal crossing might have looked like on paper. The bridge that resulted was strange looking precisely because it was economical, a lesson in how financial pragmatism, not architectural vision, produced one of the most photographed silhouettes on the entire Mother Road. 2. The toll booth that became a landmark. For nearly 40 years, that arrangement worked exactly as its investors had hoped. Route 66 traffic grew year after year through the 1930s, the post-war boom, and into the 1950s, and every car, truck, and Greyhound bus that needed to cross the river at St. Louis funneled through the same toll booths at the same bend in the same bridge. The Chain of Rocks Bridge did not become famous because it was beautiful, though its odd-angled silhouette against the river certainly helped. It became famous because, for 2 generations of American road travelers, it was simply unavoidable. Photographs and postcards from the era treat the bridge less like infrastructure and more like a milestone, a physical marker travelers could point to and say they had crossed. Roadside businesses grew up around both approaches to the crossing, motels and diners positioning themselves specifically to catch drivers who had just paid their toll or were bracing to pay it. An entire local economy built on the simple fact that everyone heading this direction eventually had to stop here first. The toll itself, modest by any measure, added up across millions of individual crossings into a revenue stream steady enough that nobody involved in running the bridge had any reason to imagine its business model ever failing. Even the Great Depression, which devastated so much of the country's transportation infrastructure, barely dented the bridge's fortunes. Route 66 itself became a lifeline during those years, carrying migrant families west toward California in search of work, and every one of them still had to cross the Mississippi somewhere. The Chain of Rocks Bridge collected its toll from the poorest travelers of the era just as reliably as it had from the tourists and businessmen of the prosperous 1920s, a grim kind of consistency that speaks to how deeply the bridge's economics depended on necessity rather than prosperity. That confidence made sense for exactly as long as the Chain of Rocks Bridge remained the only practical way across. Its entire value, financial and cultural both, depended on scarcity, on being the one crossing everyone needed, rather than one crossing among several. 3. The bridge that broke its business model. In 1967, a new Chain of Rocks bridge opened just downstream, wider, straighter, built to handle the volume of an interstate era the old 1929 span had never been designed for. It carried the same crossing, served the same corridor, and offered drivers the one thing the old bridge's entire business had always depended on nobody having: a free alternative. Traffic evaporated almost immediately. Toll revenue, which had sustained the old bridge through 4 decades of steady operation, collapsed within a single year as drivers simply chose the new free route instead. By 1968, the numbers had fallen so far that the city of Madison, which by then controlled the aging span, could no longer justify the cost of keeping it open, and the bridge was closed to vehicular traffic entirely, less than 40 years after it opened. The speed of that collapse is worth pausing on. This wasn't a business slowly losing customers to a rival over years of gradual erosion. It was closer to a light switch, a bridge earning steady toll revenue one year and functionally worthless as a business the next, the moment drivers had somewhere else to go. Nothing about the old bridge itself had changed. Its steel was the same steel, its bend was the same bend, its capacity to carry traffic hadn't diminished at all. What changed was purely a matter of competition, and competition, it turns out, can be far more ruthless than decay. This is the same arithmetic that has killed tunnels, roads, and railways across this whole series. A piece of infrastructure outgrown not by failure, but by its own successor. What makes the Chain of Rocks Bridge different is how directly financial the collapse was. This wasn't a slow decline measured in decades of dwindling ridership. It was a toll bridge whose entire reason for existing, the fact that drivers had no choice but to pay it, simply stopped being true the day a free alternative opened a short distance downstream. The bridge didn't get old, its business model got deleted. 4. The bill nobody wanted to pay. A closed bridge across a major river is not a small liability to walk away from, and by the mid-1970s, officials had drawn up plans to solve the problem the obvious way: demolish it, clear the crossing, and stop paying to maintain a mile of steel truss that no longer served any purpose. Contractors were consulted, estimates were prepared. On paper, tearing the Chain of Rocks Bridge down looked like a straightforward, if expensive, decision. Then the numbers stopped adding up. Steel scrap prices, which demolition contractors typically counted on to offset a significant portion of a teardown's cost, had dropped sharply through the 1970s, and the revenue a contractor could expect to recover by scrapping the old bridge's structure no longer came close to covering what it would cost to actually take it apart. Demolishing a mile-long steel truss bridge over a major navigable river isn't cheap under the best of circumstances, and without the scrap value to offset that cost, the project stopped making financial sense to anyone being asked to pay for it. Think about how thin a margin this actually was. A demolition contract like this had always been built around a straightforward equation: the cost of labor and equipment on one side, the resale value of thousands of tons of recovered steel on the other. For decades, that equation had reliably favored demolition. Tearing structures down and selling the scrap was simply how large bridges disappeared when their useful life ended. The 1970s scrap steel slump broke that equation for the Chain of Rocks Bridge at precisely the moment someone finally sat down to run the numbers. A coincidence of timing that mattered more to this bridge's survival than any deliberate act of preservation ever could have. Nobody made a decision to save the Chain of Rocks Bridge in the 1970s. Nobody stood up in a council meeting and argued for its historical value, or its place in Route 66 law, or the strange dignity of its 22-degree bend. The demolition simply wasn't executed because the one number that mattered, cost versus recoverable value, never lined up in demolition's favor. The bridge survived its closest brush with destruction, not through preservation, but through an accountant's math problem nobody could solve profitably. There is something almost humbling in how little agency anyone had over the outcome. Bridges are usually saved or lost through some form of human choice: a vote, a campaign, a wealthy donor, a determined preservationist chaining themselves to a girder. The Chain of Rocks Bridge got none of that in the 1970s. Its survival came down to global commodity prices moving in a direction nobody involved could control or predict, a reminder that infrastructure this large doesn't always live or die by decisions made about the infrastructure itself. Sometimes it lives or dies by numbers moving on a market ticker thousands of miles away, entirely indifferent to the bridge, the highway, or the history riding on top of either one. Whoever set that scrap price that year had never heard of Route 66 and never would, and yet their decision mattered more to this bridge's fate than any vote a city council could have taken. 20 years of belonging to no one. What follows a demolition that quietly falls through is rarely a clean resolution. It's limbo. For most of the next 2 decades, the Chain of Rocks Bridge existed in exactly that state: closed, unmaintained, legally still somebody's responsibility, but nobody's priority, slowly accumulating the kind of neglect that closed bridges collect when there's no active plan for their future either way. Vandalism and decay set in through the late 1970s and 1980s. Broken windows in the old toll structures, graffiti spreading across the steel, the bridge drifting into the specific kind of urban ruin that attracts filmmakers looking for a genuinely post-apocalyptic backdrop, which is exactly how it ended up as a filming location for Escape from New York in 1980, for a bridge built to be the busiest crossing on America's most famous highway. That transformation, from toll booth landmark to cinematic wasteland, in barely more than a decade, says everything about how completely its purpose had evaporated. There's a particular irony in that casting choice worth sitting with. Escape from New York imagined a Manhattan sealed off and abandoned, a monument to civilization simply giving up on a piece of valuable infrastructure rather than figuring out what to do with it. Location scouts didn't have to imagine that abandonment on the Chain of Rocks Bridge. They found it already sitting there, real decay standing in for fictional collapse, a bridge that had genuinely been given up on doing exactly the visual work a film crew needed without a single set piece built to fake it. Ownership questions lingered the entire time. Liability for a structure nobody wanted to demolish and nobody had a use for is its own quiet financial burden, insurance costs and inspection requirements piling up against an asset generating no revenue at all. The Chain of Rocks Bridge cost someone money every single year it sat there doing nothing, an ongoing bill for a piece of infrastructure that had already failed once as a toll road and had no obvious second act waiting for it. That kind of slow bleed liability is exactly the situation that traps so much abandoned infrastructure in permanent limbo. Nobody wants to spend the money to fix a structure with no clear future, but nobody wants to spend the money to remove it either, so it simply sits, degrading a little further every year, generating cost without generating any offsetting value. For the better part of 2 decades, that was the entire financial life of the Chain of Rocks Bridge, a structure worth nothing on paper and yet still capable of costing its owners real money simply by continuing to exist. Structurally sound, but economically invisible, waiting for someone to finally ask the one question nobody had bothered asking: what else could this bridge possibly be for? 2 decades is a long time to leave that question unanswered, long enough for an entire generation to grow up nearby with no memory of the bridge ever carrying a single car. 6. The non-profit that saw an asset where everyone else saw a liability. In 1989, that changed, not because a government agency suddenly found the budget to demolish the bridge after all, but because a non-profit called TrailNet looked at the same unwanted structure and did something nobody in the previous 20 years had bothered to do. They ran the numbers the other direction. Instead of asking what it would cost to tear the bridge down, they asked what it might be worth to keep it standing and simply change what it was for. The pitch was straightforward: a mile-long steel bridge across the Mississippi, already structurally intact, already connecting 2 states, could become one of the longest pedestrian and bicycle bridges in the world, linking recreational trail systems in Missouri and Illinois without a single car needing to cross it. Where the original toll model had depended on scarcity, charging drivers who had no other option, this new model depended on the opposite idea entirely, drawing cyclists and walkers specifically because the crossing was rare and worth traveling to experience. That reversal is the whole story in miniature. Everything that had made the bridge commercially worthless as a road, its age, its narrow lanes, its inability to handle modern traffic volumes, was completely irrelevant to a bridge meant only for people on foot or on two wheels. The very qualities that had doomed it as a vehicle crossing turned out to be exactly what made it charming and functional as a recreational one. Nobody had to fix what was wrong with the bridge, they simply had to stop asking it to be a road. Restoration took years and real money, but it was money spent building toward an asset rather than money spent eliminating a liability, a fundamentally different kind of investment than anything the bridge had attracted since 1929. Grants, local fundraising, and years of advocacy work replaced the toll booth's steady drip of nickels and dimes as the bridge's new source of income. Proof that a structure everyone had once measured purely by how much traffic it could charge could be sustained instead by how much people simply wanted it to exist. That shift, from extracting value out of every crossing to inviting people in for free, would have been unthinkable to the investors who financed the bridge in 1929, and it is exactly what finally let the bridge outlive them. When it reopened to foot and bicycle traffic, the chain of Roxbridge became a genuine attraction again, this time for an entirely different kind of Route 66 traveller, one walking the Mother Road on foot rather than driving it, stopping in the middle of that same 22-degree bend to look out over the same river that had once demanded a toll from every single person who wanted to cross it. This bridge was never saved because anyone loved it enough to fight for it. It survived because tearing it down cost more than leaving it alone, and the non-profit that finally found a use for it simply ran the math one more time. If you've walked that bend or crossed it by toll, tell us in the comments and hit subscribe for more hidden history.